Good evening. You're very welcome to this edition of Ireland's Generation X, a series that focuses on the group of people born between 1965 and 1985, an artistic generation caught between baby boomers and millennials. We're delighted to present this series in partnership with the Keough Institute for Irish Studies at the University of Notre Dame. My name is Simon O'Connor. I'm the director here at MLitt, the Museum of Literature Ireland, located on Dublin's St. Stephen's Green. Our doors might be closed at the moment, but we've been busy behind the scenes working on a collection of digital projects, including events like this one, recordings for our digital radio station, Radio MLitt, and a recent set of poetry films to celebrate St. Bridget's Day in collaboration with the Department of Foreign Affairs. So you can check all of those out at molly.ie. This evening we're joined once again by Professor Barry McCrea, a novelist and a scholar of comparative literature, who will be in conversation with Ian Lynch. Ian is a musician, a singer, a songwriter, and a founding member of the band Lankum. And we've long been fans of Ian's, and in fact, nearly 2 years ago to this day, Ian performed at the launch of Radio MLitt on Joyce's birthday here in the museum. That virtuoso performance of Joyce's Ballad of Pierce O'Reilly left the room completely gobsmacked, as many of Ian's huge following will have experienced themselves at his gigs at home and around the world. So we're so genuinely delighted to have Ian with us this evening. Before I go, for anybody at home with children at the moment engaging in the massive homeschooling experiment, you might like to take a look at our learning resources. So most recently, we've been publishing weekly writing workshops for primary school children, but there's a whole range of learning materials for all ages on the MLitt website. So have a look at molly.ie/learning for more information about that. And finally, if you do enjoy tonight's programme, I'd encourage you to buy MLitt membership, either for yourself or a friend. It's a very easy way to support the museum's programming, both now during the pandemic and off into the future when we come out the other side. With that, thanks so much for joining us this evening, and I'll hand you over to Professor Barry McCrea and Ian Lynch.
Thank you very much, Simon. Thank you everybody for coming this evening or this afternoon over in the US. And especially thanks to you, Ian, for joining us. I know you're podcasting and composing and doing lots of things, so we're very grateful for your time. I asked my colleague, Ian Newman, who teaches song history at Notre Dame and is a big fan, as you know, of the band. I asked him if he had any questions for you. And the first one he gave me, I thought we might use to frame our conversation a bit, which is, and I'm quoting him now, how did somebody with anarcho-punk leanings end up wanting to found a trad band? So I thought we might approach that question by maybe just tell us a bit about your childhood and where music was and the kind of musical influences and musical education you had as a child.
So I suppose my earliest childhood musical experiences outside of the world of like Top of the Pops and things like that would have been very much in my own family. It was a family, I just thought this was a very normal thing at the time, but a family who were very fond of singing songs and a little bit of playing music, not so much. Like my grandfather would have played the accordion when he was younger, and when I was around he would have played the organ. And we used to have these big family get-togethers, mainly at Christmas time and at, other christenings and stuff throughout the year. And what used to happen is that everybody would start drinking and then just start singing. And absolutely, it seemed like everybody in the room would get a turn to sing. Didn't matter, it wasn't a question of whether they were good singers or not. It was just that's what you did. Everybody sang songs, and that's how they passed the time. So I only learned in later years that my granddad would have played music professionally when he was younger, and then my uncle Tommy, he would have written a lot of his own songs as well, kind of like comic songs and just very good songs, but he would have been playing and singing these at these get-togethers, and I had no idea that he'd written them himself. I remember going into school, I'd be going to school after the Christmas holidays, asking people, oh, do you know this song? And, singing lines of the song, and they'd be like, no. And I didn't realise he'd written them. I suppose it wouldn't have been traditional songs per se. It would have been just a big mixed bag of all kinds of stuff. Like my granddad would have sang songs like Love's Old Sweet Song, what they call the mantelpiece songs, because the tenors used to stand up at the mantelpiece singing them. Like popular songs from the 50s and 60s, like crooner kind of stuff. And then in amongst those kind of songs, you might get stuff like someone would sing like a Dubliner song or a Pogues song or something like that. I remember I have a very distinct memory actually of my uncle Kevin singing the Irish Rover at one party. It was at some stage in the mid-80s, because I remember saying to my brother afterwards, saying, oh yeah, there was this song Kevin sang, and it was all about the boat turned 9 times around and the poor old dog was drowned. And I remember my brother didn't believe me that was a song that I'd heard. But, that was the kind of stuff that was going on. So I didn't really, like I said, I didn't think much of it at the time. But looking back now, I think it must have been an absolutely huge influence, considering the road that my life has gone down. And that, still to this point, I think the kind of musical interaction that I most value is unaccompanied singing. That to me is just the highest art form,
And then what kind of, so it would have been these mantelpiece songs, as you call them, and then songs written by your Uncle Tommy, so a mixture of new things and old things, but also, I suppose, Dublin music hall numbers which come up, in which the band has done.
Yeah, absolutely. Like stuff in this, like I didn't particularly hear the song Daffodil Mulligan, but very much stuff in that style. Like I remember hearing an auntie of mine singing Oh Antonio, the music hall singer Florrie Ford, and it's stuff that was very much in that vein. Stuff I can't even remember, but when I heard those kind of music hall songs later in life, they really struck a chord with me. Like they almost like instantly brought me back to those Christmas parties, So I was definitely hearing a bit of that stuff there as well, for sure.
So that's still not a trajectory towards a trad band, right? So what happened in the meantime then?
In the meantime, I mean, I would have, I started playing the guitar when I was 12, I think. A friend of mine taught me the chords to About a Girl by Nirvana, and that would have been very kind of much indicative of the kind of music I was into at that stage. I was into like Nirvana and Pearl Jam, also into a bit of like classic metal stuff like Iron Maiden and Metallica and things like that, from maybe the age of 8 or 9, from like older cousins giving me LPs and stuff like that. And it wasn't until maybe, I was playing in bands and all as a teenager, playing in kind of like grungy, punky kind of bands, and then about the age of 17 or 18 I started kind of feeling the urge, like I was being drawn towards stuff like the Pogues and stuff like the Dubliners. I might have gotten a best of CD, or got a tape. I remember a friend of mine gave me a tape, and on one side it was all Christy Moore songs. It was a lot of stuff from the Prosperous album and some of his other solo albums, and on the other side it was like old ska, so just in little dribs and drabs I started kind of becoming more and more attuned to that kind of music. So it would have been bands like basically Christy Moore, the Pogues, the Dubliners, and then a bit after that Planksty, and they would have been kind of the main ones to open up the whole world.
So I'm curious to know what that discovery felt like for you. That, I suppose for some people there's an idea, almost patriotic idea, that they want to get into traditional music and understand the kind of the musical history of the country. But you arrived through a very musical path to it, I suppose, then, more than another one.
Yeah. Like, to be honest, I think maybe earlier on I would have had a bit of a reaction against what I saw as traditional music, and just like Irish culture in general. Like, I had a very hard time growing up with like a few teachers and stuff, mainly Irish teachers, and I would have been, looking back at it now, it's kind of embarrassing, but like just very reactionary against Irish culture, Irish language, Irish nationalism. I was an angry teenage punk rocker, and I was against all that and wanted to burn it all down. So ironically, I think it was the aspects that I was drawn towards in, like, you know, in the songs that I was hearing from the Dubliners and Christy Moore. It was like the kind of social protest songs. It was more political songs. It was stuff like The Button Pusher or The Sun Is Burning or Sacco and Vanzetti by Christy Moore, or, you know, and songs about like the working man, and songs of you know, union songs, and, you know, the songs that Joe Hill wrote and all that kind of stuff. You know, that was really the bridge for me. It was something I saw as, I suppose, ideologically speaking as well as musically speaking, that I was thinking, yeah, well, this is, you know, this is what I'm into, and it makes sense to me, and this is the same, you know, along the same lines as the stuff that Crass and Subhumans are singing about, and whatever other punk bands I was listening to at the time, you know. And then there was also what I saw as being a very DIY aspect to the way that traditional music sessions worked. You know, just a very decentralized way of doing it. The fact that, you know, the way I saw it then, that nobody was doing it for a profit. It was just people gathered to play the music that they loved. And to me, that was like, that's punk rock in its very essence, you know.
So there's something radical at the core of it that you weren't expecting, that reminded you of, or resonated with the kind of music you were listening to before that as well.
I think so, yeah, because I suppose before I had been exposed to that side of that side of traditional song, I would have had an idea that was just a very conservative kind of culture, you know, maybe like very restrictive and right wing in a lot of ways. And then it was, yeah, so I suppose it was a revelation coming across these songs that the Dubliners were singing, and that Christy Moore was singing, and Andy Irvine and everyone else, you know. And I suppose they were like absolute bohemians back in their day as well. But that was really what struck me.
So maybe you might tell us a bit about the band. I think most people probably are familiar with it, but maybe not everybody is. So maybe tell us about the sound of the band, the idea behind it. Maybe just describe it.
Yeah, so I suppose that the sound that Lankum has is something that's developed quite organically over the years. When we started off, we were, you know, just me and my brother, and then Cormac and Rady, 4 friends who just really enjoyed playing music together. And now we've been playing together for 8 or 9 years, and I suppose our sound has grown to be just a lot bigger and more expansive. You know, I find it hard to kind of describe what exactly it is we do. But basically, we like to sit around in a room, and, you know, we'll find like traditional songs that we like, and we'll work them over and over and over until we come up with an arrangement that we're into. And a lot of the time it ends up being on the long side. You know, we go for like kind of big arrangements, like a lot of our songs would be like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes, maybe 11 or 12 minutes is some of our longest ones. But I suppose it's all about finding the emotional core of the song, and trying to bring out certain elements that maybe wouldn't be so obvious in other people's arrangements of the same songs. Yeah, I suppose it's more about our own personal relationship to the songs, you know, and what we hear in them and what we want to bring out of the songs. And maybe that's what we do.
It seems to me like there's 2 main sides in it. There's yourself and your brother on the one side, and then there's Cormac and Rady, who are more straightforward trad. But the result isn't just 1 + 1 equals a mix. The result is some kind of third thing that is that's not like either one, in a way. Is that true?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the easy way to look at it, and maybe it's overly simplistic, was like, okay, so you had me and my brother on one side, and we were, you know, coming from this like squatting scene, and we had our own thing going on with just a guitar and a tin whistle, and it was very rough and raucous. And then Rady and Cormac on the other side, coming from a very much straight-laced traditional background, you know, had been playing like straight up trad since they were 5 or 6 years old, went to cultus, were playing in competitions from a very early age, all that kind of thing. And then the 4 of us kind of met in the middle somewhere, and that it's somewhere in there that we find our sound from. But it's not really that straightforward, because at certain times, like, I might be the one, if we're talking about a certain song, I might be the one being a total purist and saying we have to stay authentic to this, and Rady and Cormac might be the ones coming up with the mad ideas, So it really depends on the song, but I think we've definitely found a place where we're all very comfortable, and I can't really imagine playing in a band with any other people or how you would even go about it. There's been certain times where I've done collaborations with other people over the last few years, and I kind of just like, I forgot how hard it was sometimes, because we're just so used to doing it now with Lankum that it's become a very natural thing,
It is a sound like no other, and I know that for lots of people who like the band, myself included, it feels like it fills a space that was already there, like a space that needed something. I couldn't quite describe what it is, but I think that a lot of the people who love the band have that feeling that it is something very identifiable and unique. So what about the repertoire then? What are the songs you do? Where do you find them? Where do they come from? How do you pick them? Maybe just also describe to people what they are.
I suppose the traditional songs that are in our repertoire, they would, I feel like they come to me personally, and like the songs that I might bring to the table, they just come very naturally, like it's something, as like with the podcast that I do, I'm constantly listening to old recordings, like archival recordings, field recordings of older singers and things like that. And before the lockdown happened, we would have been going to traditional singing sessions around the country, and the traditional singing festival up in Inishowen, and things like that. And still now, I'd go to them the odd time on Zoom or whatever, where they still have them. So it's just about being in a space where I'm always just hearing new traditional songs that I haven't heard before. And it's the same with the other lads. They be listening to old recordings, or maybe like looking up old songbooks or whatever, and just coming across these absolute gems and thinking, wow, like nobody's gone near this song in 150 years. Why not? This is look at this, lads. This is amazing. And then either we agree with each other or we don't agree. And if the four of us are into it, then we'll say, okay, let's give it a shot, and we'll try and come up with some arrangement or see what happens with it. And then a lot of the times with songs, we might work on them for a few weeks, and then we just go, they don't really grab our interest anymore, and they fall by the wayside. And then sometimes we get really excited about them and put them into our live set as soon as possible, So it's something that's just constantly moving, and all of us are constantly bringing new songs to the table. I think that's almost like the easy part. The hard part is the actual writing original songs. That's a lot more difficult, I find.
So let's start with the folk song part of it. So some of them are very familiar songs. Salonica was one people would have heard a lot, for example. There's a good few that are fairly well known, although you turn them into very different kinds of songs. And then some of them are songs that are not well known, folk songs, sometimes English ones, that sometimes that seem very simple on the surface, like Henry, My Son, or the Turkish Reveille, that then you kind of expand out, you kind of open up into something else.
Yeah. That's... Yes, I don't know what was the question.
No, I suppose I think what are the different kinds of traditional songs that you do, and what do you...
okay.
Yeah. So those fairly simple ones that people wouldn't know, Henry, My Son, or the Turkish Reveille, maybe say something about those ones.
Yeah, I suppose Henry, My Son. So that was a song that was it was on an album Frank Hart recorded, his very first album he recorded back in the 60s, I think, and it was an album of Dublin street songs, and it sounds very much like a kid's version. It's actually stems from a much older ballad, Lord Randall, but in this kind of format, it was it's kind of like a kid's call and response. You can imagine it might have been connected to a little game or something, but I remember coming home singing that for the first time, and my mother, who grew up in a city centre, she said, oh, we used to sing that song when we were kids, in the 50s when we were playing around. And then my dad, who grew up out in Harmonstown, he said the same thing. He said, yeah, we used to play that when we were kids as well. Or not sing the song. and they recognise that. So I don't know. There's something. I mean, because I see. So the way I understand the tradition is like it's a stream of sorts, and at different times, different places, and different ages, there's all kinds of influences like feeding into this stream, coming from coming from everywhere. There's like, songs like that would have come over with the Scottish planters in the 1600s, like old Scottish ballads that came over and are still being sung in Ireland today, like Barbary Allen or the Lass of Aughrim, or Lord Gregory's, stuff like that. And then you would have had, in the 1800s, you would have had like some music hall influences coming in, and you would have had like songs that were written for the ballad sheets. You would have had songs that were like composed by people in this very Anglo-Irish style, where they were writing songs in the English language, but it was using the rhyming schemes, like the kind of interlinear rhyming schemes, and the lots of assonance and alliteration and stuff, and that's a whole another body of song, and that's something that feeds into it. And then there's songs that were written around the time of various wars, up to Second World War probably. They were coming into it. Then you have like songs that were written in England in the miners' strikes, and all these different things just feeding into this great big stream of tradition. And I don't think that, to me, like none of it is really more authentic than anything else. You could have a song that was written, like music hall songs. They were written for commercial purposes. They were written for singers who were professional and sang songs on the stages, but people used to go to those shows and they'd come home and they'd start singing the songs, and maybe they'd forget the words, or maybe they'd change some of them along the way, but that's the way it went. And then somebody else would hear that, and next thing you know, the song is in the tradition. And that, to me, that's no less authentic than a song that's 200 years older than that. It's the same process that's going on, So,
and I suppose Ireland as a nation in its history is especially attached to this idea of the song tradition, and traditional music is a big part of our sense of ourselves. The idea that we have this long tradition of folk song is one of the ways in which we lay claim to our identity. But I suppose the negative way of saying this was some of these songs aren't all that Irish at all. It's not the only way to phrase it, but that's true, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes I get surprised myself. Like, there was one a while ago, I was looking into the Rocky Road to Dublin and found out that was composed for an English music hall singer called Harry Clifton. It's not Irish at all. It was like written with a stage Irish kind of vibe in mind. Stuff like the Wild Rover, the Unquiet Grave, Seven Drunken Nights, all these songs, like when you actually look into them and where they came from, a lot of them stemmed from, some of them from Scotland, but an awful lot of them from England. But just like any other traditional songs, they would have made their way over here in some way or another, and become a part of our tradition. And then, as I said, they pass from one singer to another, and next thing you know, someone isn't talking about a place name in England, like it's not Oxford anymore, they've changed it to Wexford or something like that, to make it more familiar to them. Or maybe the characters' names in the song are changed to names that sound a bit more Irish. But when you look back at it, you realise that a lot of the older singers, and even people that were recorded, who lived long enough to be recorded in the 20th century, they didn't care. They weren't concerned with where the songs came from. I think the more important thing was if the song resonated with them, and if the song held some personal meaning to them. And maybe, to me, I kind of see that people are more drawn towards the songs where they can see some kind of like parallel to their own lives in, So I think these are the things that draw people to songs, and the songs themselves don't recognise any boundaries.
In your podcast, you describe, you take individual songs, and sometimes you talk in more general terms about the way songs travel, and you've Scotland, England, Ireland, the Caribbean, the southern US, Canada, Australia. So I suppose I'm interested in both what changes and what stays the same. And when you think about the folk songs in general, since you know so many of them, what are some of the, I suppose, preoccupations that remain constant in the songs that come up again and again and again?
I think there's so many different categories that you could go into here, you know. Like there's so you have like some of them that have like an anti-militaristic point of view, you know, that would describe a soldier coming home maimed or otherwise damaged. You'd have other songs concerning soldiers where they have the archetype of, you have to watch out for them, especially songs of warning to young women, not to let go near the soldiers, or you're going to end up pregnant and they're going to run away. That pops up in a lot of songs. You'd have songs, and I'm trying to think of like a kind of a very general kind of rule that you could say about them all, but I think one thing that you see very much across the board is that the songs always are on the side of the underdog, and that's very much the way folklore works in general. Like if you look at any of the well-known folk tales, it's always the underdog. It's always like the weakest person who comes up trumps in the end. And I think that's something that plays very deeply into human psychology. They're the stories that we want to hear. You don't want to hear the story about how the rich person got richer. We want to hear how the poor man stole his gold off him and got away with it. So then you have stories like bank robbers and highwaymen that are very much romanticized as well.
I suppose it's people who don't leave written traces of their lives, leave the traces of their lives in song.
Absolutely, and I think that's something to me that maybe like the most. It's pretty much it's the only way for us to look into the emotional lives of people who were living 200 years ago. People who've left no other trace of their lives other than these are the songs. Maybe they didn't write the songs, but they learned them from somewhere else and carried them on. So they were speaking to these people on some level. And so you can look at these songs and it can give us clues into how people were feeling about certain things. And even some songs that were written, when we can pinpoint them to, this song was written at this point in time and it was printed by numerous ballad sheet printers around the country. So that must mean that people were generally sympathetic to the point of view that the song was espousing. So it gives you this very, very valuable kind of view into what was going on. And if it wasn't for these songs, you wouldn't have any idea at all. It's people who weren't written into any kind of history book or anything like that, in any other way.
And some of them are framed as warnings as well, aren't they? Like especially some of the women's songs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you'd wonder how these songs were speaking to women's experiences at the time. And was there anything else like this, going on, like stuff like, even with Salonika and things like that, that's really like speaking to women's experiences, like in Cork during the time of the First World War. And you think, was there anything else like doing that at the time,
It is striking how a lot of the soldier songs are from the point of view of not the soldiers themselves, but the women that they leave behind, but mothers and lovers and so on. That comes up a lot, I think, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, in a very sympathetic view of their plight and what they were going through at the time.
Well, it's just interesting, I think, because I suppose when we think of war as such a big part of history, with a capital H, and what we know in written history is the story of the battles and the soldiers, but in folk song, we get it sort of from the margins, from the sides of people who are at the edge of the war. But then some songs change their meanings altogether, like the Wild Rover, which is one that you've done together as a band. Do you want to tell us a bit about that? It's kind of almost reversed its meaning over the centuries.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about the fact that now people kind of view it as the Irish drinking song, that's the one that first comes to their head. Think, oh yeah, Ireland, yeah, it's all about drinking and the Wild Rover. But it's fascinating that when it was originally written, it would have stemmed from this group of ballads that were being written in the 1600s in England called like the Goodfellow ballads, and they were kind of all based in the alehouse, which was like the alehouse was the institution that was. It was like the lowest form. You had the tavern and you had the inn, but the alehouse was kind of on the bottom. It was very much for the kind of lower rungs of society. But out of this group of ballads, you have a smaller group which are all about how you shouldn't waste your money on drink, promoting temperance and sobriety, you know, telling people to save the money and, you know, give your kids and your wife a better quality of life. Don't be drinking down the alehouse with the rest of the good fellows. And that is where the Wild Rover originally stemmed from, was from this group of ballads. It was a huge song compared to what it is today. It was a 13-verse ballad, and it was called the Goodfellows Resolution. And it's all about this fella who has drank all his savings away, and he is expressing a very deep regret for a life wasted on alcoholism and all the people he's hurt through it. And so from an English song of temperance and sobriety to in what is seen as the greatest Irish drinking song ever, that's the biggest leap you can have, really, isn't it?
Yeah, while leaving so much of the song intact, you can still say no, nay, never, no more.
Yeah, and that's the thing, that it's not, the actual song hasn't changed, but the function, like where it's sang and the meaning that people give it, I suppose, by the way that it's sung. You know, it's sung with great gusto but if you slow it down and, you know, like the way we did it, it's a bit more it's just a bit more slowed down. Certain things are drawn out. It's given a different air. The lyrics are pretty much exactly the same, but it's really interesting how songs work like that, and how, you know, given a bit of time, they can take on such different functions in society that are so far removed from what they originally had in mind, you know.
So, if it's okay with you, Ian, we're going to watch and listen to you now. This is a song called The Ballad of Percy O'Reilly, which was written by Joyce for Finnegan's Wake. He includes the notes and the lyrics in Finnegan's Wake. Do you want to introduce it for us?
I don't know what to say really about this song. It's so complex. It's a real piece of work. I mean, anyone who's familiar with Joyce should know about it. But I learned this. I remember I heard a recording of Ronnie Drew singing it years ago. I think it was recorded back in the 60s or 70s, I'm just guessing. But he only sang like about 7 of the verses, and he left out all the really difficult ones. And then a good while later, I heard a recording of a really great singer from Artane in Dublin called Barry Gleeson. And so Barry recorded an album called I Heard a Bird at Dawn. And, you know, Barry, he's an ex-English school teacher. And he would have just, you know, he would have just a very great knowledge of Irish literature. And he has songs on the album that are, you know, that come from the writing of Yeats. He's a song from John B. Keane from the Sive play. And he has 2 Joyce songs. And so at the end of the album, he has a song called Forgive Me Quick. And then this song, The Ballad of Percy O'Reilly.
Okay, I think it's that's a good introduction to it. I mean, the other thing I would only add is that it's definitely the idea of a Dublin folk song put through the sausage machine of James Joyce's brain, so it comes out in a very...
sausage machine is the word for it, yeah.
Different.
Have you heard of one Humpty Dumpty, how he fell with a roll and a rumble, curled up like Lord Oliver Crumble by the butt of the magazine wall, at the magazine wall, hump helmet and all. He was one time our king in a castle, now he's kicked about like a rotten old parsnip, and from Green Street he'll be sent the order of his worship to the penal jail of Mountjoy, to the jail of Mountjoy, jail him and joy. He was father of all schemes for to bother us, slow coaches and immaculate contraceptives for the populace, mare's milk for the sick, 7 dry Sundays a week, open air love and religious reform, and religion's reform, so hideous in form. Our voices you couldn't even manage it, I'll go bail me fine dairyman darling, and like the bumping bull of the Cassidys,
All his butter is in his horns, his butter is in his horns, butter his horns. Hurrah there, hosty, frosty hosty, change that shirt on you. Ryan the Ran, the king of all rans, Balbaccio, Balbuccio. We had chops, chairs chewing the chicken pox and china chambers, universally provided by our soft soaping salesman. Small wonder he'll cheater, one our local lads nicknamed him, when Shimpton first took to the floor with his bucket shop store down Bargain Way Glore. So snug he was in his hotel premises sumptuous, but soon we'll bonfire all his trash tricks and trumpery, and the short Sheriff Clancy'll be winding up his unlimited company, with the bailiff's bomb at the door, bim bam at the door, then he'll bum no more. Sweet bad luck and the waves wash to our island, the hooker of the Hammerfast Viking, and Gall's course on the day that a Blanna Bay saw his black and tan man o' war, saw his man o' war at the harbour bar. Where from roars Poolbeg, Keough and Halfpenny balls, Donnywask and Pittlewick and Wipe and Fampany, Fingal MacOscar, one sign Barjars, Boniface, Toxman, Gamelhole, Norvegickers, Moniker, August Arac, Gamelhorn, Norvegickers, Cod, and Norwegian Camel Cod, he is the god. Lift it, hosty, lift it, you divil ye, Ryan the Ran, the king of all rans. It was during some freshwater garden pumping, or according to the nurse and mirror was admiring the monkeys, that our heavyweight heathen Humphrey first made bold and made to woo, woo, who, what'll she do? The general lost her maiden loo. He ought to blush for himself, the old hay-headed philosopher, for to go and shove himself that way on top of her. By Christ, he's the crux of the catalogue of our antediluvial zoo, Messrs. Billing and Keough, Noah's Lark's good as new. He was jolted by Wellington's monument, our notorious hippopotamus, when some bugger let down the back trap of the omnibus, and he caught his dead Fusiliers with his rent in his rears. Give him 6 years. 'Tis sore pity for his innocent poor children, but watch out for his missus legitimate. When that flu gets a hold of old Earwicker, won't there be earwigs on the green, big earwigs on the green, the largest ever you've seen. Sophocles, Shites Power, Pseudo-Danto, and Annie Moses. Then we'll have a free trade Gaels band and mass meeting, for to sod that brave son of Scandinavia, and we'll bury him down in Oxman's town, with all the divil and Danes, with the deaf and dumb Danes, and all their remains. And not all the king's men nor his horses will ever resurrect his corpus, for there's no true spell in Connacht or hell that's able to raise a Cain.
The first thing that comes to mind is that you should have got some sort of medal for that. That it seems it must have broken some kind of record. It's extraordinary. I mean, that's your voice is so recognizable and extraordinary, but it's also a feat of memory that's hard for me to even imagine. You deserve some kind of medal from the city of Dublin for that work you have. So we have questions coming in now in the chat. So the first one is from Anna. And she's asking you, in a world of algorithmically generated musical suggestions, how would you recommend finding older music?
Okay. Listen to my podcast. No. Oh, geez, that's a tough one. In a world of admirabilities, like the way I find you have to do is you just have to start digging. You know, find something that you know, and start digging. You know, find the artist that you're into. Like, search out all the other stuff they've done, then find out artists that are connected by them. I'm not talking about like the you know, recommend similar artists on Spotify or whatever. Maybe look up like if it's traditional song you're after, like forums like mudcat.org, which has been going since like 1998 or something like that. And I go there all the time for all my information about this kind of thing. There's a number of websites out there as well. There's a website called Mainly Norfolk, and basically if you're looking up a traditional song, they will give you like all the versions of this song that's been recorded, all the artists who have done it, all the catalogue numbers of the LPs, and some of them are very hard to find at times, but that's always a good place to start as well. So between Mudcat and Mainly Norfolk, they're kind of about the two that I turn to most often, and I'd advise.
I am going to say, or repeat rather, you know, without getting too into plumos, that your podcast is a great place to expand your sense of music. Fire Drawn Ear, it's called, for people who don't know it, and you get everything there from Delia Murphy to Caribbean music, to punk, to rare recordings of us old Australian people in the 1950s. So there's really an extraordinary range of things there. So then the next question is from, I don't know if it's Kathleen or Caitlin, and it's, I suppose that's answered. What are your favorite? Oh no, maybe this is a different one. What are your favorite texts or resources regarding the folk tradition?
So two books that I keep going back to again and again. The first one is Narrative Singing in Ireland by Hugh Shields. Hugh Shields was an absolute authority on Irish traditional song. In all its myriad forms, and that's a really interesting book because he talks about, first of all, like narrative forms of Irish language singing. So he talks about these like Fenian lays, these like really, really, really long tales of the Fianna that were sung and recited. And his theory was that because of the existence of this type of song, the like the child ballads and those like kind of the more typical like narrative ballads, they didn't come to Ireland as early as they could, and so he talks about the kind of all the different stages of the singing tradition, from these early Fenian lays to like Sean Notes, to the child ballads, to ballad sheets, and then like traditional singing in the 20th century. That's a really amazing book. And then there's another book that I really like, and it's called The Singing Will Never Be Done, and that's a collection of essays and lectures by Tom Munnelly. Now Tom Munnelly was he was one of the best song collectors in Ireland, I think. He was working for the Irish Folklore Commission for a number of years, but between working for the Folklore Commission and working now, it's now called the National Folklore Collection, but between working for them, so that would be like, you know, people refer to it as the Folklore Archive out in UCD, between working for there and his own kind of doing his own field work out of his own interest, he was recording songs up and down the country for over 40 years, and he made some really, really amazing discoveries. Like he would have found, he recorded a singer called John Riley in Roscommon singing a song called The Well Below the Valley, and before anyone found out about John Riley, it was widely believed that that was a song that had died out like 150 years beforehand. There's songs like Lord of Boar and Mary Flynn, which is a version of a very old Scottish ballad. Same thing, it hadn't been heard of in over 100 years. He made some really amazing discoveries, but just a very, very astute and learned man, and his writing is really amazing because it's really all based on his own experiences. He would have recorded quite a lot amongst the travelling community, and he had a lot to say about that as well. But just, he was a really fascinating man, and yeah, this book, The Singing Will Never Be Done. So yeah, those two books I'd recommend to anybody who was interested in the subject.
And John Riley himself was a traveller, I think, that Christy Moore took songs from as well. And am I right that Lankum comes from a song that you got from him, the name?
Well, okay, this is where lots of people think this, but John Riley had, I think, a second cousin also called John Riley, and but just for to make it easier, he's usually referred to as John Riley Jr. But so John Riley Jr. was recorded singing the song "False Lankum," and it was Tom Munnelly who recorded him singing the song in 1971. Yeah.
Okay. There's a question from Simon, which is one, I suppose, connected to the work of the Museum of Literature, which is, where do Ian or Barry think the song tradition fits in terms of literature or poetry? Does this tradition of writing get the attention it deserves within the storytelling canon as it's taught in schools and universities? What do you think?
I don't think so. I mean, to me, I think, okay, so there's the very visible kind of like upper levels where you do find out, like when I was in school, we learned whiskey in the jar or something like that, in second class, and that was really my only experience of like any of this kind of traditional song or music growing up. I think, I mean, obviously there are some schools, like the schools that the lads went to where like playing trad and learning Irish songs and stuff was a big thing. But I think this, like, I think there's a different kind of attitude towards English language traditional song in Ireland, where I think it's definitely not given the respect it deserves. Because I know, probably in the educational syllabus and stuff, people have a bit of respect and admiration for sean-nós and Irish language kind of side of things, but for the English language song tradition, it's maybe not seen as something that is as valid as the Irish one, but I mean, despite the fact, I mean, people have been singing these songs for 300 or 400 years in the country, like to me that's as traditional as anything, I think it's just as valid as any of the other like strands of tradition that are extant.
I agree with you, Ian, and I also think that they're a repository of psychological impulses and predicaments that it's that you couldn't really narrate or describe in an explicit way, but that in an implicit way are very important to feel and have access to, and helpful for children in that way. Or not just children, in fact, adults as well.
Well, this is where I think it's maybe helpful to understand like traditional songs as one other aspect of folklore, and what you quite often find in folklore, whether it is like narrative tales or like proverbs or things like that, they're really, in a lot of ways, they've been kind of distilled, like they're these like items that have been distilled down to their emotional core. So any extraneous elements or any bits that didn't make sense to people were just like discarded or lost over time, and they've evolved into these things that I think as they find us today are very polished, very distilled, like real just little nuggets of gold, because they've gone through the minds and gone through the mouths of so many people over the years, and you think about each one of those people could have been making their own little improvements here and there. So by the time they get down to us, I think they're really, really things that should be cherished and valued.
Yeah, and the product of a collective endeavor as well, not just one guy sitting down and writing his feelings, but this concentrated collective thing. Yeah,
absolutely.
And then John James asks, do you know where the tradition of not singing but speaking the last line of a trad song comes from, or what it means?
I don't know exactly where it comes from, but one theory, and I'd imagine it's one of those things that there's probably a few theories floating around about, but one theory that I heard was that at one stage people in some areas, I don't know where, when they started off the song, they would speak the first line of the song and then sing the song and then speak the last line of the song. And the idea behind that was that the conversation was moving out of the kind of mundane everyday speech and moving on to another like specialized level, which is the song, and then the spoken word or the spoken line at the end of the song was to bring things back down again and signal that the communication was coming back down to the more earthly stuff.
So in a way, managing the emotions of the listeners, their experience.
Something along those lines, yeah. And now, like I said, that's just one theory I've heard, and it can be very hard to prove these things definitively. But I mean, that makes sense to me for sure.
It's the feeling you have, all right, that you're just you're being sent back home, or
yeah.
So we're nearly running out of time, but we've one more question from Nigel, who's saying, what events of today will be good for a ballad that will be sung by someone not born yet, or sung in 50 years from now?
Oh, gee, I'd say after the last year we're having, there'll be plenty of ballads being written. Yeah,
no shortage.
We have enough material there to keep us going for a long while, I'd say.
And then Ross says, what could you say on the revival of the Irish music and tradition, when at the time things seem so disconnected from it? I suppose disconnected from trad and that tradition.
Well, I think in a certain way, I mean, I have certainly seen an upsurge of interest in all aspects of tradition, but especially in traditional song over the last 10 years. And I think in a lot of ways that it's a very kind of natural reaction to the way modern society is going, and the disconnectedness and the kind of the ennui that people can feel, the sense of just being like disconnected from yourself, disconnected from the landscape, disconnected from everything around you. And I think in a way there's the fact that we're kind of headed more towards that way as a society leads people to kind of want to dig and find something deeper, find something where they can find comfort and solace, and something that means something. When we're gonna have this very much this society of like instant satisfaction, where you can whatever you want, but it's all this kind of useless consumer goods. It doesn't it's like just eating junk food. The stuff we're getting fed, as culturally speaking, in a lot of ways, I think that can lead people to want to find something that's just a bit more meaningful. And I think that's...
I agree. I also have a hope that the vibrancy of the folk tradition in Ireland might be one of the things that protects us from big far right populist movements that you get in other places. That it may offer people a sense of belonging and connectedness in this late capitalist world, or how you describe it. In the last few minutes, do you want to tell us a bit about your podcast? I'd like everybody to know about it, because I find it's been great company for me.
Sure, yeah. So I started Fire Draw Near. I'm just about to put out episode 15 on Monday. So I've been working on it about a year and a half. It started off, I did like a kind of guest radio show with the lads for NTS Radio over in London, and I just had such great crack doing it. I thought, I should just start doing a radio show. So it's gotten a bit more serious over time, kind of put a good bit more work into it now. But I'm basically trying to look at just various aspects of Irish traditional music and song, and finding connections with other musical genres. Looking at maybe other genres that would have influenced Irish music in ways that you wouldn't suspect, and vice versa, how Irish music and even like sometimes musical tropes or lyrical tropes might have made their way into very just other areas that you wouldn't expect. So like say a few episodes ago I did one on a tune that started out as an English country dance, and that went on to become a Scottish song called John Anderson, My Joe, which then we find the same tune being used in the Crushkeen Lawn, and by memory inspired other Irish traditional songs. But then it's the tune that is used for Johnny I Hardly Knew You and When Johnny Comes Marching Home. And then I looked at how that influenced a book that was written called Johnny Got His Gun, and that led on to Metallica writing their single One from And Justice for All. So just like tracing these lines through musical culture, but usually using like some Irish traditional song or tune as its base, and just pulling on the little red thread and seeing where it leads. I have a great time researching and recording it, and I like when other people like it as well.
So Fire Draw Near, that's the name of it for us, so everybody has it there. And then in the last minute, do you want to just tell us something about, because obviously it's been a strange time for a gigging band what you're up to next, or what your plans are.
Yeah, so we've spent the last few weeks, actually we've been all together for the first time in a long time, like arranging new material, writing new material, and we've got a load of stuff ready. So I mean, you know, nobody knows. We have got some gigs booked for in May, and they probably won't happen, to be honest. I'd imagine that things in Ireland, you know, I can imagine bands from Ireland touring in Ireland before anything else happens. Now, whenever that might be, you know, be good if it was sometime this year. But you know, we're just trying to use the time as constructively as we can. We didn't do anything. We had, you know, really great plans at the start of the lockdown. Oh yeah, we'll just start recording. We'll make loads of new albums and na. But didn't do a thing. Played like two live streams for the whole year, and that was it. So now we're really like, yeah, we're determined to get our heads down and come up with some new material and hopefully record this year. But you know, we'll see how that goes. But we're trying our best anyway. Let's say that.
I'm looking forward to it. We're out of time now, Ian. Thank you very much for joining us. That was fantastic.
Thanks very much for having me. Yeah, I really enjoyed that as well. Thank you.